I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined as always by my textual co-host, Brett.
Hello, Alice. Pleasure as always to join you. And we are going to be talking about text today, which is what I assume you're referring to. Just,
And you're a textualist.
There was a time.
You read the
true.
text. You are an absolute textualist. You love words. You are a linguist.
And
also,
what they
we're
mean.
talking about texts.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, if the Asha Degree case was cold before, it's hot now.
Oh, my goodness. Boy, is it hot. First of all, what we're going to talk about today, you can read yourself. I actually am surprised when people want us to do an update because I'm like, we're reading the same documents as you. It's a relatively short document. We're going to post it. Read it for yourself. We are helping to interpret what we see from this document, but we don't know anything beyond this document. So we can speculate and see what it means, but we are also looking at the same facts that have been revealed.
I have a quick question for you. Do you think it's strange that this search warrant is public?
Very. Incredibly, because there hasn't been an indictment.
Yeah, thought about that too.
I mean, I don't know the process, but usually the investigator has the ability to keep something under seal if something's still being investigated. And for us, at least, we have to unseal the warrant once we have an indictment because it's part of the whole case. But before the indictment, we keep it sealed. And the reason we typically say is it could hamper the investigation. Imagine if you had no idea you were being investigated and all of a sudden you see a search warrant with your name on it, like full names are being used here, and you are not a indicted person for purposes of the law. Don't worry, you hear a baby, but he will be moved soon.
Yeah, and maybe it's just different in North Carolina, as we've said 1,000 times. Every jurisdiction is different. Yeah, and maybe it's just different in North Carolina, as we've said 1,000 times. Every jurisdiction is different. Where we work, search warrants are sealed until, as Alice said, there's an indictment, and then they are unsealed. So, I don't know. Like I said, maybe that's just North Carolina, but it did strike me as interesting.
Do we know the circumstances in which this was unsealed? The default is sealed, and obviously this came out, it didn't come out the day it was filed.
No, it didn't. It was a few days afterwards. I'm not sure. I guess.
If it had come out the same day, I would have said I would have thought it was a mistake. Because sometimes we accidentally file things not under seal and then you go back and file it under seal. But if it came out a few days later, then it seems to have been a conscious decision to unseal.
I bet after it was served, they unsealed it. So they probably served it on him and then they unsealed it.
But that's still, the fact you don't redact. It's not redacted,
anything.
Right? So full names are in there. It's funny because news articles are like, we're going to leave out the names of the children. And I'm like, well, it's in the search warrant.
Yeah, there's no reason to hide anything because it's all there.
Right. Well, anyways, there's a lot going on in this case. If you guys remember, we covered the Asha Degree case. It was one of the first cases, really, we covered on the Prosecutor's podcast. And it was a complete mystery. Truly, the case went cold. Within a year of Asha disappearing, her backpack was found, but her body was never found. If there's a body to be found, or if she was alive, that's the hope. But as we said in those episodes, she was never heard from again. And it was cold for, 20 years or so?
Yeah.
Before the last
24 years.
Year.
Yeah.
24 years. Goodness gracious. It was 2000.
2001? It was 2000.
2000. Mm-hmm. The millennium. And now we have a search warrant, which, as we've told you guys, they're supported by an affidavit to establish probable cause to be able to search and seize certain things pursuant to an investigation. And when you do these, you have to say what you think the crime is. So you can't just say generally, I think there's things in here that are interesting. It has to be in pursuit of an investigation into a potential crime. And this one is quite the doozy, y'all. This is not a nothing burger. This reveals a lot of information about what the police have so far in the Asha Degree case. And it is hot in the sense that I think we will know who did this, or someone will face criminal consequences regarding Asha Degree soon.
Yeah, I'm hoping that this year. And let me say this, we're going to go through this warrant. Obviously, this is an affidavit. It's sworn to by a police officer, but it is based on the information they know at this time. As we've said 1,000 times, this changes. And just because you have an affidavit doesn't mean that it necessarily reflects where your investigation is going to end up. This is based on the information they have now. And there is a strong temptation to speculate about where exactly this investigation is going. I get that. We'll talk a little bit about that. But just know that there's a good chance that a lot of the people we're going to talk about today may know nothing about this case. So just remember that before you start jumping to conclusions. Let's talk about the people involved. Roy Lee Dedmon. He is the patriarch of the Dedmon family. He is the owner, or was the owner, of some assisted living facilities, and he lives in Shelby, North Carolina. His wife is Connie Elliott Dedmon. Now, they're still married, but they live in separate homes. I don't know what that's about, but that's their situation right now. Both Roy and Connie are designated as suspects in the warrant, which is interesting. They use that kind of language. At the time of Asha's disappearance, they lived at 601 Cherryville Road in Shelby, North Carolina. Asha's family lived at 3404 Oakcrest Street, which is about 4.5 miles away, 5-minute drive from each other. Another person who is named, but it's a little unclear how important they are, Russell Bradley Underhill. He was a patient at one of those facilities we talked about that the Dedmons owned. He is now deceased. He is interesting because his DNA was found with Asha's belongings in her backpack, the one that was found buried several, like 15, 20 miles away from the last places that Asha was sighted, in the opposite direction from the way she was going when she was seen. And yes, it was double bagged in 2 different plastic bags. It was discovered by a construction crew. This DNA was found in that backpack.
And from the affidavit to the warrant, we know that there are a few more relevant people, and one of them is Lizzie Grace Dedmon Foster. She's the eldest daughter of Roy and Connie, and she now lives in Texas. But at the time of Asha's disappearance, she was 16 years old. Next is her sister, Sarah Gwen Dedmon Capel. She's the middle daughter, so there's 3 daughters for the Dedmons, and she was 15 at the time that Asha disappeared, and she still lives in Shelby, North Carolina. And that leads us to the third Dedmon sister, Anna Lee Victoria Dedmon Ramirez. She was the youngest of the 3 daughters, and she was only 13 years old at the time of Asha's disappearance. And she lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. And another interesting thing about Anna Lee is that her DNA was also found on Asha's belongings along with Russell's. The next person is Kelly Foster. And this is Lizzie Dedmon Foster's ex-husband, who makes an appearance, as you'll see why, in the warrant as well.
So let's talk about the warrant. The warrant is dated February 13th, 2025, which is 25 years to the day after Asha's parents put her to bed and never saw her again. She disappeared sometime in the night. She's often said to have disappeared on the next day, the 14th, but it would have been very early that day because she left in the middle of the night. But, you know, coincidences being what they are, 25 years later, we're getting this warrant. It was issued by the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, and it was for an Apple iPhone 11 Pro that was owned by Roy Lee Dedmon. So the facts in the affidavit. So when you're trying to get a warrant for someone's cell phone, or really for anything, one of the things you have to show is the facts that are known to you that lead you to believe, number 1, that a crime was committed, and number 2, that evidence of that crime will be found in the place to be searched. So the story we're going to tell here is, why are we trying to get into this person's phone? So some relevant facts. We've already told you one, which is that you had this gentleman, Russell Underhill, who lived at one of these facilities that was owned by the Dedmons, someone who had health problems. His DNA was found with Asha's belongings. But even more significant than that, because if it was just him, you might wonder, what is the connection here? There was a hair found on Asha's undershirt, which was in that backpack, which is genetically identical to Anna Lee Victoria Dedmon Ramirez, which is the youngest of the Dedmon daughters. She was 13 at the time of Asha's disappearance. So you have these two individuals who are connected to the Dedmons that are now connected to Asha. Now you may be wondering, how do they use those facts to get to Roy? Well, what the police are operating under, and I think this is important to remember because, as I said, people like to jump to conclusions. The idea is she is too young to have killed Asha, hidden the body, buried the backpack 20 miles away, where it would only be found by a construction company. So in order for her to have done that, she would have needed adult assistance. And the most logical adult assistance is her parents. Now, that does not necessarily mean the police actually believe that Anna Lee Dedmon, in cahoots with the guy from the facility, actually killed Asha and then called her parents and said, "Help me." As likely as that is that Asha was in the back of the vehicle owned by the family, and that DNA from the patient at the facility who was often transported in that vehicle and the youngest daughter who had ridden in that vehicle was transferred over to Asha. But that is a theory. Right now, you just follow where the evidence leads, right? You're just laying out facts. And the facts that we have are these two people, their DNA is on the body, and it's unlikely that this 13-year-old could do this alone. So therefore, she probably needed adult assistance, such as the person whose cell phone we are now looking for. So we talked about this green Rambler. You may remember that at the time of Asha's disappearance, although this information was not released too much later, which I still think was a mistake, there were witnesses who saw Asha forced into the back of a dark green vehicle. Didn't know the exact make, had a few different kinds it could have been. But what we know now is that when she was 16, Sarah, who was the middle daughter, so we've got Anna Lee's DNA on the shirt. Now we have Sarah, who's the middle daughter. She drove a dark green AMC Rambler that matches the description of the vehicle that Asha was pulled into the night of her disappearance. That Rambler is still parked, or was still parked, at the Dedmon's house before the first search warrants came out late last year. And in fact, it has damage to its front end. Whether that is related to this or not, we don't know yet. Police seized that vehicle back in September of last year, and it is still in the possession of the police.
And we had done an update back when they seized this car about the fact that this car 25 years later was still parked on the property, not in daily use. It was just parked there. So take us back to September 10th of 2024. The police called Lizzie, the oldest daughter, and asked to speak with her. Now, Anna Lee also called Lizzie twice that day, including while she was on her way home after being told a warrant would be executed. We don't know the substance of those calls. We just have phone records that show calls were made. So when you're looking at this, you can speculate what the conversations were about, but what you typically see, we've talked about this in our cell phone episodes of Legal Briefs, you'll see who made the call, at what time, how long the call was, that sort of thing. So we know that they had a call. One thing I want to note, because I've seen a lot of people online after seeing this, that there were phone calls, say things like, "Darn it, I wish those calls were wired." No, you don't. Remember constitutional rights.
Yeah.
The government, any government, state, local, federal, doesn't just get to listen in on your conversations. In order to do so, they need to get a wire tap. So just so you know, I know we swing based on what kind of cases are before us. Just know, even though, yes, I would love to know what they talked about in those conversations. No, those calls were not tapped. And for constitutional purposes, thank goodness.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on your car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary and not available in all states or situations.
What we know is that there were those two calls, and over the next hour, there were a flurry of phone calls between Lizzie, Sarah, Roy, and others. So basically, The family finds out that the warrant's getting executed and they're all calling each other. We just see a lot of calls to each other in a short succession of time, right around the time they learn about the warrant. Fast forward about a week, September 18th, after these searches became public, Thad Mellentine comes to Cleveland County Sheriff's Office for an interview. And you may be thinking, I haven't heard that name before. What does he have to do with this case? Well, he comes in after he hears about everything. He sees the news and he's like, oh, I might have relevant information. So he goes to the police and he tells them that in the mid-2000s, he was at a party with the Deadman girls because he hung out with them often. He was, in social circles with them. And on this particular night during a party, Lizzie and Sarah were both there, the two older daughters. And Lizzie, apparently at this party, had become extremely intoxicated. And while she was intoxicated, she was crying in the corner and made a number of incriminating statements, including, I killed Asha Degree. Thad then goes on to say, Sarah, her sister, hears Lizzie saying this, runs over to Lizzie and says, quote, shut the F up, while grabbing her head. And Thad said this was particularly shocking to him because Sarah never does things like this. She's actually a very calm and nice person. So for her to grab Lizzie by the head in kind of like, a violent manner and to use this type of language was out of character for her. In other words, he described Sarah as acting very agitated. Thad said he was 100% sure that this happened, and he even took and passed a polygraph test. There's a lot to unpack there. I know a lot of people are like, well, Bing pot, got it. That's exactly what happened. Okay, even if Thad is 100% sure that this happened, this is at a party where Lizzie is so intoxicated that she is apparently in the corner sobbing and making claims of committing a very serious crime. So probably Lizzie wasn't drinking alone. This was probably a party where there was alcohol and there were probably a lot of people having alcohol. So I just want to caution you because this is a really shocking confession. And Thad may 100% believe it. Let's hold it with a little bit delicate fingers right now because the surroundings of what's happening. And by the way, if this is really what happened and he took it seriously at the time, it's not that he now remembers it happened. He remembered it happened apparently back in the mid-2000s. So it's not like that wasn't relevant information back then. People knew who Asha Degree was in that area as well, you would think. Maybe, maybe not. But whether you say you killed someone or not, whether you know who that person is not, if you think someone's being serious, there is a question of why wouldn't you have gone to the police 15 years earlier or 20 years earlier?
And look, he may be telling the truth. I don't know if he's telling the truth. This is so on the nose. I killed Asha Degree. It's about as on the nose as it could be. It is as on the nose as it could be. And I don't want to say I doubt it, but I view this with a lot of skepticism. I don't necessarily view the fact that he didn't say anything for 20 years, because that's about how long it would be, with skepticism, just because everybody had been drinking and maybe he didn't think anything of it. He's certainly not going to rush to the police and say, hey, my friend said she killed somebody. I don't know what to think about this. When you pass a polygraph, okay, I mean, that means he believes it happened and maybe it did happen. It's also possible it was something slightly different, she said. I also don't know exactly what that would mean. I think people naturally jump to the conclusion that, she took out the Rambler that night. Maybe she was going to meet a boy or something. And she's driving down the road, and there's Asha in a storm, in the dark, at night, and she hits her. And that's how she killed her, and that's why the car is damaged on the front, and everything else that happened from that point followed from there. That's a possibility. Another possibility, if you want to get even darker, is that someone she knew, maybe her father, maybe someone else, had Asha for some reason, and she said something like, I'm going to tell. And that person said, well, I'm going to kill this girl, and killed her. And then she blames herself. All this to say, even if she said, I killed Asha Degree, it doesn't necessarily mean it's as clean as that sounds. So I know people are rightly going crazy over that statement, but I think everybody should pump the brakes a little bit and just let this develop more before we put too much on Thad and his 20-year-old statement that he heard at a party when everyone was drunk. And what's going to be interesting, we know that statement now. We're about to get into text messages that were recovered from Lizzie's iCloud account. So, the police hear this information, and apparently, there was another warrant. It's funny because we talked about why is this one public? Apparently, there was another warrant, or maybe we've seen this warrant and it just didn't include this information for Lizzie's iCloud account. So they got that warrant at some point, and they got this information on October 27th, 2024. So he comes in on the 18th, they get the warrant. About a month later, they get the information from Apple. And so we're going to go through these messages with you, and we'll try and go back and forth, and we'll tell you who is being spoken to during these conversations and when they occurred.
By the way, I'm feeling pretty good about my laziness for not upgrading my iCloud account and saying it hasn't been backed up in like 185 days or something.
There you go.
And by the way, this is relevant too because people are like, why would they put this all in writing? Guys, whether it's late, we all do it. We all do it all the time, right? You can imagine you're just texting your sisters. That's exactly what's happening. So I fully believe this is exactly what's going on.
And let me also say this. If these people are involved in this, they're not some master criminals. They would have kept a secret for 25 years if they're involved in this, but it's not like, they stole the crown jewels of Britain or something. So them freaking out isn't all that surprising. Remember, when did this phone call happen to Lizzie? September 10th, 2024. And she has that flurry of calls. Well, at around 2:48, there's an incoming call from Anna Lee Deadman. And this call lasted for a few minutes. After the call is over, so the call comes in at 2:48, at 2:53, there's a text from Anna Lee Deadman to Lizzie.
And so Lizzie responds back. So we don't know what the substance of that conversation was, but Lizzie responds, "It's okay. I'm leaving school."
So what this tells us, I think, once again, we're reading tea leaves here, right? So this is all speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. But it seems like when Anna Lee called Lizzie, she unloaded for some reason. And it's interesting that happened. What she unloaded, whether it was anger or sort of her own personal emotions about this, she just spilled it all to Lizzie in a very quick phone call, hangs up, and then immediately feels like, I need to text and say, hey, I'm sorry I did that. And that's what happened. I think that's interesting just because, is it surprising that if the police were calling you and saying, hey, we're coming to search houses, we're looking for information, that you would call your family, even if you're perfectly innocent? I don't think it is. If the police called me right now and said, hey, maybe not right now, but say I'm at work, they called me and they said, hey, we are coming to search your house, the first person I would call is my wife. That's the first person I would call. Wouldn't necessarily mean I had done anything illegal or she had done anything illegal. It's just the natural thing to do. So the fact that they have all these calls, I don't necessarily find that suspicious. But the content of the text messages with those calls does make it sound like whatever they're discussing is a little bit more fiery than just, what in the world's going on? Why are the police coming? That doesn't make any sense. That it doesn't seem like that was the content of this phone call.
Right. Now, over the next day, there are several messages between Lizzie, Anna Lee, and Sarah, so between the three sisters. And it's in reference to being approached by law enforcement about this Asha Degree investigation.
Okay, so these texts continue throughout these days, and we're going to go through some of them. So at 4:45, Sarah Capel, you remember, Sarah is the middle daughter. So she's the one who's 15. She's the one who still lives in Shelby. So she texts Lizzie Foster, and they're trying to figure out exactly what's going on. They think it's her shirt. They think it's our shirt. It's not her shirt. Now they're talking about, remember, what is something we have focused on for years? The New Kids on the Block shirt, sleeping gown, whatever it was that was found in her bag that did not belong to Asha. So clearly a police officer has said, there was this shirt and we think it's one of y'all's. We think it's one of y'all's shirts. And what's fascinating about this, we talked about this a little bit last time, This happened in 2000. And one thing we talked about all the way back in the beginning was how weird it was that it would be a New Kids on the Block shirt in 2000. Because New Kids on the Block was so like 1993, right? It wasn't 2000. I might not be getting it exactly right on the 90s year, but it's around then. But if you go back from when these girls were 16, 15, 13, you back up 7 or 8 years, all of a sudden you have a young girl about Asha's age who would be wearing a shirt that size who would absolutely be into New Kids on the Block. So it's not surprising that the police think this is their shirt, and that's what they're texting about during this conversation. It continues. So these are sort of in quick succession. Sarah then texts, her mom said it wasn't hers. Sarah then texts Lizzie, I don't remember that shirt, which is another interesting way to put it, right? Like, what does that mean? I don't remember that shirt. Why would you remember that shirt?
Right. As opposed to, what are they talking about? Right. They're trying to fit, it sounds like they're trying to fit this shirt into their memory. Like, this has got to be our shirt, but I can't remember it. As opposed to, what are you talking about? That's not my shirt whatsoever. That's why it's interesting. The framing of it is trying to place this back into their memory.
Right. I mean, I don't know. Then she says, I'm scared, though. Dad is probably going to be a huge suspect, which is true. So, I don't know whether that isn't necessarily as suspicious as the previous ones, because she is. So then that's at 4. I keep wanting to call it 1646 because this is all in military time, but that's at 4:46. So then at 5:01, Sarah text Lizzie again. So I feel like she's waiting for responses and she's not getting them because Lizzie's not putting anything in writing right now. She says, Lizzie, can you talk? And then, as we said, there are all sorts of phone calls that are going back between these family members over this day.
And it's all day, right? We've seen them basically start talking and texting as soon as they learn about the warrant, and it goes into the midnight hour into the next day. So right after midnight, Sarah texts Lizzie and says, this is a nightmare. I'm like shaking and can't walk now either, which is also very interesting because it seems like based just on the warrant, there may not be very much information, but you may be shaking or think it's a nightmare if the police are coming to you and say, this is what we have on you, right? This is reacting more so than there's a warrant being executed at my house. It seems like there's more information that we don't know about. Now, here's where the person that we talked about as a relevant person that may have stuck out was Kelly Foster. Like, who's Kelly? Why is Kelly part of this? This is why he's here, because of a text message. So that morning at 8:37, Kelly Foster, who is Lizzie's ex-husband, texts Lizzie and says, I'm so sorry you and your family is going through this right now, especially Anna and your mom. Just horrible. Really, really interesting here, especially because he calls out Anna and her mom, Anna and Connie, as if, again, this is all speculation, but when we're talking about terrible things happening, you would feel particularly bad, for example, for people who have nothing to do with it. I can imagine why he would say Anna. Anna's DNA was found, is the identical hair found. So I can understand that part. But then to say especially, it's in parentheses, especially Anna and your mom, why the two of them? You would think, and you have seen all these text messages with Sarah saying, I'm shaking, this is a nightmare, Lizzie being the one approached by the police, them saying Dad would be a huge suspect. So I can see how at least things are circling around maybe what Roy, Lizzie, and Sarah know. And Kelly's text message kind of confirms for me that those three are in a separate camp than Connie and Anna. I don't know why they're in a separate camp, but just the way he segregates them out.
And what's really interesting is it feels like everybody is trying to put a little bit of a cap on Lizzie. Like you see these texts are sort of flying at her, and we're not getting a whole lot of text back from her. We got the it's okay, I'm leaving school text. But other than that, like, we're seeing text to her, but not a lot from her. And it seems like people are trying to get a handle on her, and you're going to see that more as the texts continue.
Right. So later that day, that's a really good point. We see a lot of text going to Lizzie. She's not putting a lot in writing. So later that day at almost 2:00, Anna Lee Dedman texts Lizzie, Lizzie, you don't need to be talking to anyone. I'm at the lawyer's office. This probably a typo, but basically saying, don't talk to anybody. I'm at a lawyer. And 2:01, just a couple minutes later, Annalee then texts Lizzie again. Now, they advise us we should all not talk to them without representation. So it seems like she's at the lawyer's office, actively talking to the lawyer and texting Lizzie, being like, Lizzie, don't you dare say anything. We need a lawyer representing us when we talk to them. And again, why Lizzie in particular? Now, we don't have other people's phones, so we don't know who else is being talked to, but I'm assuming Lizzie's not texting anyone else saying don't say anything. So it seems like Lizzie has information, or at least there's some reason to make sure Lizzie isn't talking.
And I think one thing to note, we don't have every single text message sent on this day or sent from Lizzie or whatever in this search warrant. They've included what they considered to be relevant and the ones they wanted to include. But you would think if Lizzie was responding to these texts, those would be the kind of texts they would include. So they didn't include any responses to that message, but now we're going to get one from Lizzie. So at 4:55, there's a text, same day. There's a text from Lizzie to Kelly. This is going to get nothing but worse. I'm talking to my doctor at 5 to get something for my nerves. You know, we've said this 1,000 times, and I'm going to say it 1,000 times in this episode, but it is always a dangerous thing to try and interpret people's actions and their words and figure out exactly what they're saying and put yourself in their shoes and understand why they're talking the way they are. But I will say the way it sounds is not like, what in the world is happening? Why are people all of a sudden focused on us? We don't have anything to do with this. This is insane. It's more like, it feels more like something is coming up that they had all hoped they would never have to talk about again. That's honestly the way it reads to me, whether that's what it is or not. So she says that. So that's at 4:55. At 4:56, she texts Kelly again. I am just so worried. So worried. 1 minute later, also to Kelly. I mean, it's a nightmare that's going to keep getting worse. I can see nothing good happening anytime soon, and I'm an optimist.
And so Kelly just received, kind of this barrage of texts. It looks like probably while Lizzie is waiting for her doctor. And at 5:35, Kelly responds to Lizzie, oh no, I hate it for y'all. And then Lizzie texts back to Kelly within the same minute, there's no way this is going to be okay. Again, very interesting, right? Why would it not be okay? Obviously, people's homes are searched. We even say this, in traffic stops. People who know they have illegal paraphernalia in their cars, like drugs or whatever, will consent to searches. And for her to say there's no way this is going to be okay, I don't know in what context. It might be something as simple as emotionally. Like, I will never recover from this emotionally. It has nothing to do with Asha Degree. That's very possible. But it's interesting that she's saying there's no way this is going to be okay, seeming to mean because there's more information that she may know that would lead to her thinking this can't be okay.
I hate to always talk about Delphi, but this reminds me so much of Richard Allen when they first came to search his house, and he repeatedly saying, it's over, and his defenders try to say, oh, well, he's just saying the neighbors are seeing the police at the house and they're going to put two and two together and think he's somehow involved. And so, his social life is over and it'll never be the same. Okay. Yeah, sure. Maybe. But what it sounds like to me is he had gotten away with it for so long, but now the day has come, the day he always feared, when the police showed up at his door and he's like, it's over. I'm done. Right? This sounds so much like that. This sounds so much like it's finally happened. This is not going to be okay. We're not going to unring this bell. That's what it sounds like to me, whether that's what it means or not. But I do want to leave open that possibility that she's just saying, everyone's going to think we had something to do with this now. It's never going to be okay again. That is a possibility and one way to interpret this. So the next day, September 12th, at 6:14, there's a text from Lizzie to Sarah. I just talked to David Teddy. The theory is I did it. Accident. Covered it up.
Real quick, David Teddy is their attorney. You'll get the context of that later, but
not attorney-client privilege, because she is sharing it with a third party, so therefore we don't have to worry about that. And Kelly Foster is her ex-husband, so even if there was some spousal privilege at one time, there's not anymore. So all this is fair game. Now,
And they were not married at the time of Asha's disappearance.
this set of texts is really interesting because up to this point, you've kind of been thinking Lizzie must be involved. Lizzie must have done something, right? I mean, the popular theory that's out there that's like a hit and run or something. She is now saying that is the theory, that that's what happened. There was an accident and it was covered up. She texts this to Sarah. Sarah immediately texts back, no, why would it be you? Which is a fascinating thing to say. Like, unless at this point you're texting with the expectation that one day your texts are going to be read. If this is just an honest conversation between these two, this is a strange exchange if, in fact, it was Lizzie and it was an accident and it was a cover-up.
And by the way, if you had an accident and you covered it up, that's still a crime. And so for the theory to be that there was a crime, just reading between the lines seems to be that it's because what may have really happened was a much bigger crime, was a much more serious crime, right? Just because you had an accident and you covered it up, that covering up is a crime. And also potentially hitting them is also manslaughter, right? And so note that this is not like, the theory isn't something like super innocuous. This theory is really bad for Lizzie still. And you wouldn't come up with this theory if there were nothing criminal whatsoever. And so that's why I think this is incredibly interesting. And also the fact that seems like the way it reads, it wasn't Lizzie who was at fault.
So Sarah says, no, why would it be you? And Lizzie responds, that's what he said. So 15 minutes later, there is a text from Lizzie to Kelly Foster. Remember, Kelly is the ex-husband. I don't know if I can go to work tomorrow. I wanted to originally. That happened at 6:29. Now, I find this to be interesting. It may be a coincidence, but 2 minutes later, there's an incoming call from Anna Lee. So she sends this text to her ex-husband indicating that she may go to work tomorrow. She's thinking about going to work tomorrow, where she obviously will be the subject of some conversation and everything else. And 2 minutes later, she gets this call from Anna Lee. It makes me wonder if Kelly maybe let Anna Lee know, hey, your sister's talking about going to work tomorrow. You might want to talk to her. And then she immediately calls Lizzie.
So appears that Anna talks to Lizzie for a little bit of time, because about 6 minutes after Anna calls Lizzie, Lizzie texts Kelly, I feel so horrible, and sends another text, so horrible. And then she texts him yet again, I don't know what to do. I caused this. Very, very interesting. We're ping-ponging back and forth, because the previous set of texts we just told you, oh, we thought the theory here was Lizzie did something. But then there's this theory where it says she has to take blame, and her sister saying, why? Why would it be you? That's shocking. But then here we have again, I caused this. Now, this is why earlier when we talked about Thad's overhearing a confession, I think this plays into it, because remember we had said she may have even said the words, I killed Asha Degree, but it doesn't necessarily mean she physically was the one who killed Asha Degree, but rather her actions may have set into motion what led to her death. This is what sounds more like it. When she says, I caused this, which part? Asha Degree? The search warrant? The fact that the police are calling? The fact that this theory is being cooked up by the defense team? It's not clear what she's talking about, but the I caused this. This is the first time we hear something beyond just, this is a nightmare, this is horrible. Because up until this point, maybe you're still thinking, well, maybe if you had a search warrant being executed on your house, you would also be freaking out. But here she's saying, I caused this.
And one other thing that's interesting, maybe someone remembers something that I've forgotten, but once again, to be charitable, I caused this. Imagine I'm the reason everyone's looking at my family and making us look bad. There's nothing that she did that I know of that led to this investigation at all. For instance, it would be an irrational thought if you were Anna, whose DNA was on Asha's shirt. If you thought, this is my fault. My DNA is on the shirt. I have no idea how it got there, but this is my fault. And because my DNA is on her shirt, everybody's looking at my family and they think my dad did this and I feel so terrible about it. But that's not the case. Lizzie, of all of them, has no direct connection to the crime.
We even
Remember,
said that,
it was,
I think, in our update. I think we didn't even list her because she was the one who lived in Texas.
She lived in Texas. Sarah was the one driving the green car, and Anna Lee was the one with the DNA on the shirt. So why is Lizzie, of the three of them, why is she the one saying, I caused this? What does that mean? Kelly responds immediately and says, no, you didn't! Exclamation point. She then texts back and says, I don't know if I can see V. V is Vivian, which is her and Kelly's daughter. Then there's a text from Kelly back to her, no way. Now, I think that's no, you didn't, no way, because they're like, I don't necessarily know that that's no way you can't see
The texts
V.
are coming in on top of each other. They're all within like the same minute.
Right. This is all fast and furious. Yeah. And then she texts back, I don't know what I'm doing or feeling. I guess I'm in shock. And then she says, I just feel weird.
So this is all happening. I mean, like we said, these texts are happening on top of each other. And then Kelly texts Lizzie and says, any theory that involves his kids is a ridiculous one. Another kind of bombshell text. Because I still don't know exactly what's going on. But I assume his refers to their father, Roy, in this situation, and his kids refers to Lizzie, Anna, and Sarah. And he's saying, remember, we started this whole conversation with the attorney saying the theory is it was an accident, we covered it up. I was the one who did it. But Kelly doesn't seem to be trying to set up an alibi. This does not read as if they're trying to create texts to be found later by law enforcement. It sounds like he's responding in real time and saying, look, this is ridiculous. Anything that involves you kids, you girls, that's a ridiculous theory, which to me seems to suggest that the kids, the girls, were not involved. And right after this text from Kelly, Sarah calls Lizzie, then Kelly calls Lizzie 2 minutes later, then 7 minutes later, enter Roy. Dad calls Lizzie. So note this, we have a flurry of texts between Lizzie and Kelly talking about what the theory is going to be from the defense attorney. And then there's all these calls. No longer are they talking about it in text, but no, it seems like everyone's calling Lizzie. Sarah, Kelly, Roy in the span of 10 minutes.
So this once again is all from September 12th, 2024. So these incoming calls are happening. Then she has this call with her dad that happens at 7 o'clock. At 7:34, there is a text from Lizzie to Sarah. Hey, is everybody mad at me? So then 1 minute later, Sarah texts back, nobody is. She says Lozzie, which I assume
Lizzie.
Could be a misprint, or maybe that's like a child name for her. I don't know. Nobody is Lizzie! Exclamation point. Then, and this is, in all caps, not your fault. Now, I just want to point out one thing that also is not her fault, or one possibility you might be thinking is, well, maybe they know about the guy going to the police and saying that she said that. And that's what they mean, that's like reinforced it. He said that and she said something when she was drunk. They wouldn't know that yet because he didn't go in to talk to the police until September 18th. So unless they are really prescient and thinking back to something she said in like 2005 and thinking that somehow led to this 20 years later, I don't think that's what they're talking about. She, for whatever reason, and it's really hard for me to figure out what it is, she keeps indicating that somehow she is responsible for all of this coming down on her family, and her family, including her ex-husband, are trying to convince her
it's not her fault.
No, this is not your fault.
Whew. So a lot's happening here. Remember, Lizzie was first contacted by police on November 10th. So this is all happening in the span of 2 days. The police come back to her on September 28th, 2024 in Texas by Lieutenant Daniel Howell, who comes up to her and asks to speak to her again. But at this point, she refuses to speak with law enforcement.
So the next day after that, at 5:09, there's a text from Lizzie to Sarah. I'm just so anxious about like what's going on behind the scenes, which is perfectly probably normal even if you had nothing to do with this. She then texts like, what are they doing now? Then it's interesting because, as we said at the beginning, it's like she wasn't saying anything. She was sort of, she wasn't responding to these texts. She wasn't texting. Now it seems like she's spiraling and she's just kind of blurting things out on text.
And note that we don't have every text, but the texts that we do have, they are all coming in succession. They're all coming within the same minute. And so it's not like she's texting and then doing other things for a couple hours and coming back. These are like, when you say spiraling, like hitting text one after another, like before anyone has a chance to respond.
Yeah. I mean, this is all fast and furious. So she then says, what's going to happen to me since I wouldn't talk to them? Because the day before she wouldn't talk to him. And she says, I'm afraid it's going to get worse. Well, he told me it's going to. Sarah then responds and says, I know, girl, I am a disaster.
I assume that's talking about the police. I'm just, who knows? It also could be the dad. But there's only so many he's in this story so far. It's a bunch of sisters and a mom and one dad. But note that, and it could be, I could imagine that the police says, hey, can we talk? And she says, no, I'm not going to talk to you. Says, well, this isn't the end of it. I can imagine that conversation happened, but she could be taking this as it's going to get much worse. They know more. And so after Sarah says, I know I'm a disaster, very interesting as well. Sarah seems to know something as well. And then Sarah texts Lizzie again. I think if they come at you again, you just go and be compliant. So I assume this means if the police come and want to talk to you again, just go, just talk to them. Don't refuse, which is interesting because a couple weeks earlier, everyone was telling her don't talk to anybody. But now we have Sarah basically acknowledging that this is a massive mental strain on both of them. Maybe like, let's stop hiding. Let's just tell what's going on. This is the way it's reading to me. Now, Sarah then says to Lizzie, that's what I'm planning on doing. Very, very interesting because suggests that she has something to say or she knows something, that she's waiting for them to come ask her what she knows.
Yeah, and I wonder if they ever talked to Sarah because Sarah seems more open to having a conversation than Lizzie does at this point. But then Lizzie says, I think so too, honestly. I mean, I want to do what Dad says. So they've talked to Dad. Now, once again, this could be completely innocuous because what is it that every podcast tells you to do if the police want to talk to you about a crime? Don't talk. Get a lawyer. You need to be represented. And Dad, they could all be perfectly innocent. And Dad's just saying, look, don't talk to them without a lawyer. You don't need to talk to the police. They're trying to pin this on you. You want to be protected. He could just be saying that, right? He's not necessarily anything nefarious. So, but we know for certain that Dad has been giving them information. She says, okay, so that was Lizzie. And then Lizzie says, but damn.
Again, showing kind of the mental strain this is, emotional strain this is. And so, again, all of these texts are happening within seconds of each other. And Sarah then responds to Lizzie, and maybe we should have let you do what you originally wanted to do. We don't know what she originally wanted to do. Maybe it was to talk to the police. Maybe it was to tell a different theory than what she noted was the attorney's theory. Lizzie then responds, I don't know. I really don't know. And Sarah responds, right, you don't want something we do or say impact him, but we also can't be living like this either. Now the him, there's going to be more context, but I think this him is referring to their father, Roy. Very interesting, because the way that sounds to me is that so that we know that Dad has been telling them don't talk to anybody. Could be innocuous, good fatherly advice, but then here, why would what you have to say impact your dad? Remember earlier, several weeks earlier, they had said, I'm afraid Dad's going to be a major suspect.
Look, I don't want to be naive here, but, because being on the side of law enforcement, I'm always like, oh, maybe you should just talk to the cops, right? But imagine the story is they have absolutely nothing to do with this. They lived 5 miles away from Asha. They read about it in the newspaper and then never thought about it again for 25 years. Imagine that's the story. Well, if you go to the police and you say, I don't know anything about it. I'm sorry. Don't know how the DNA ended up there. I have no idea. I have no information to give you. I'm sorry. I wish I could. How would that impact their father? How would just saying, we don't have anything to do with this, why would that impact him? There is something. It may be as innocuous as that night their dad left in the Green Rambler and they didn't see him again until the next day. Something as innocuous as that, right? Or I don't know what it is. It's pure speculation. But clearly, they are concerned that if they talk to the police, something they say is going to have an effect on their father. And Sarah says, well, she says that you don't want something we do or say to impact him, but you also can't be living like this. And Sarah says, I mean, I told him I'm not going to do that. And then Lizzie says, right. Oh, you did? What did he say? And then Sarah is responding, or is really just continuing her previous text. It's not like worth our mental health. And Lizzie says, right. And then Sarah says, he was just like, I will call Teddy. We can go get a polygraph with the honest people, whatever that means.
So then this is all still happening fast and furious. Lizzie responds, oh, okay. I really don't exactly know what this means. It could be as innocuous as the dad's like, stop spiraling. We're not going to talk to anyone other than the lawyer. Criminal search warrants are serious business, girls. Like, it could be as innocuous as that. So I'm not exactly sure, but it seemed like Lizzie thought Sarah was saying she told it to their dad. And really what Sarah meant was, no, we're just going to go talk to the lawyer. And Lizzie's like, oh, okay. I thought you like stuck it to him in some way. That's what it reads like to me. Like, stuck it to him, like, we're not going to go with your illegal plan. And then it's like Sarah didn't go that far. It was like, no, we're just going to go talk to the lawyer. And Liz's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it feels like Lizzie initially thought that Sarah told him we're going to go spill the beans.
Yeah.
Is what it sounds like, right? And then she's like, no, that's not what I mean. I told him this thing. And she's like, oh,
right.
Okay. Now, that's, once again, that's speculation to some extent, but we're just reading the text.
Then Sarah texts Lizzie, I really just don't have it in me to go through what you have been through. And Lizzie says, it's been hell. And Sarah says, just hearing about your situation has made me a disaster. And in all caps, hearing about it. And Lizzie says, oh, I'm sorry. I just can't imagine going through that, said Sarah. And Lizzie says, but y'all have dealt with other stuff that I haven't. I read you that whole, this is the end of the text. That is a really interesting exchange. Because ending that with, you guys have dealt with other stuff I haven't, maybe that just means within life. Or it could mean with respect to the Asha case. This is kind of beginning to sound like to me that Sarah and Lizzie know things, maybe Anna too, but they may not all know the same things. And now that it's come to a head, they're sharing what they each know. And maybe the piece of the puzzle they each had didn't lead them to believe anything had been wrong back 25 years ago. But now that it's coming to a head and now they're all talking to each other and sharing their little nuggets, it seems like they're putting the puzzle pieces together in real time.
Yeah. And we have very little information to go on here. Hopefully we're going to have even more, but it really feels like some sort of story is starting to develop here. And what Alice said feels like is probably right, which is it seems like different people have different part of this. I mean, just from what they're saying. And all of it was bad, but each of them went through something different. I don't know what exactly it is, but these people feel like they have a story to tell to me. And I'm hoping that eventually they will tell that story.
So this is a search warrant that you can read yourself. It's not that long. It's an affidavit, as all affidavits are, and it says it in the affidavit itself. This is an ongoing investigation, and the facts that are needed to establish probable cause for for Roy's iPhone is all that's needed in this affidavit. This isn't everything they know. They haven't released all the text messages. So keep that in mind when you read the search warrant. The facts are in support of getting Roy's phone. That's it. Not to prosecute X, Y, or Z. So this is not all the information. I do think that this is public, maybe for public pressure on the family, because it certainly sounds like through the text messages, everything's coming to a head for the family, and at least certain members are willing to talk to the police when previously maybe they didn't want to. So the police approach Lizzie with this information, with everything here, in September of 2024. And she spoke to her ex-husband, Kelly, and told the police that she was not going to talk to them or take a polygraph test. Then on February 10th, so this was last week, the police approached Lizzie yet again, but this time she did agree to take a polygraph and she failed it. So in the post polygraph interview, Lizzie told police, if my dad did it, he did it, but I had nothing to do with it. So whatever the polygraph was, she was shown to be deceptive. Look, through her text messages, she's clearly very anxious. She said back in September 10th, that she wanted to go to her doctor for her nerves. So we already know that maybe this polygraph is not the most trustworthy because it's just measuring your biometrics. And I think it's clear from these text messages, her biometrics all the time right now are probably going off the charts. But for what it's worth, she was told she failed the polygraph test. She did fail the polygraph test. And she said, if my dad did it, he did it, and not me.
So dad's cell phone does not update to the cloud. So that's one reason the police want the cell phone. Whether or not there'll be any information in it or not that's useful, it's hard to say. I would think by this point they have it, or else we wouldn't have this warrant, because the last thing you do is release the warrant before you have the phone, because then you can just erase the phone. So we'll see if more information comes from this. But Alice is 100% right. This is not the last we're going to hear about this. We said back in September that we were going to hear more, that this was just the start. And this is continuing, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on this family to crack, and it seems like they're already starting to crack.
I will note one thing. One name we haven't seen come up, even though she's listed as a suspect, is Connie. So take it for what it is. She does live separately from Roy now, but there we have it.
And it goes to that, the whole, can two or more people keep a secret? You know, like, there's a lot of cracks in this conspiracy, if there is a conspiracy to crack open.
Well, this has been, I mean, when I read the warrant, I texted Brett and I was like, whoa, Nelly. Oh my. A lot of things that get unsealed in cases are nothing burgers, as we tell you. This was not a nothing burger. There certainly are a lot more questions now than answers, but it certainly sounds like the trail is hot to both hopefully find Asha and also to bring justice for whatever happened to her 25 years ago. And this is what this reads like. I don't think they are looking for Asha 25 years later. Something happened to her back then, and hopefully we will get answers for her and her family very soon. With all that said, this is partial information. Obviously, we've speculated a lot of what's going on. We were speculating as if we were the investigators looking at this, trying to think of the next step of the investigation. I'm explaining to you why we were speculating. With that said, it is too early to know what the full story is. There are obvious holes. That's why there is an application for another warrant. And there will probably be a few more warrants after this and probably a lot more investigative witnesses coming forward. So as always, if you have information, now that you know more about this car, about the Deadmans back in this day, go to the police, because I truly think they are on the cusp of breaking this case wide open, and I hope so for Asha.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing. Look, I don't know if this guy who went to the police knows anything or not, but why'd he go? Because he saw this coverage, he remembered something that happened a long time ago, and he went to talk to the police about it. If you know something, talk. And that's the thing. Like, people always think, oh, who would know anything and hadn't talked already? Maybe Thad's full of it, but if he's not, him. He's exactly the person. So there's always people out there with more information, and it may be you, and it never hurts to call in.
Well, guys, thank you for coming along for this ride. We are very, as you know, invested in this case for a lot of reasons. It was one of the first cases that really struck me so deep in the heart because of the age of Asha, being so close in age to our kids. And we have just hit 25 years of her disappearing. And hopefully this will be one of those rare cases that even after 25 years, we can find answers for her. Let us know what you think. You can email us at prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Find us on social media. And also let us know what you'd like us to cover next. If there are developments here, we will certainly be covering it as well. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. If there are developments here, we will certainly be covering it as well. But until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.
And little guy. Yeah, I hear him. I got the
Y'all can stay here. I'm gonna bring him in here to show you how much he cries when I'm gone. One second.
No.
1 second.
Poor guy. Shh.
Say hi.
No.
Say hi. I know.
Hi.
I know.
We got you, baby.